It is a privilege to introduce architect Madhura Prematillake, a visionary architect and the driving force behind Team Architrave, a Colombo-based design practice that has set benchmarks in personalized and place-responsive architecture. Architect Madhura's philosophy envisions architecture as an humble, sustainable and adaptive dialogue between necessity, nature and humanity. The studio is renowned for its sensitivity to context, commitment to sustainability, having won 9 design awards and 4 color awards from the Sri Lanka Institute of Architects. Their work exemplifies creativity and excellence, from the creative reuse of heritage structures to the design of contemporary interiors and innovative urban landmarks. Team Architrave's influence extends beyond borders, with its projects featured in prestigious publications. Their competition-winning designs, including the Jaffna Cultural Center and the new wing of the Colombo Town Hall, reflect their commitment to cultural and civic significance. Their projects, Villa Magona and Hayden House, earned Asia Pacific Property Awards in 2013-14, and in the same year, architect Madhura was one of the 10 international architects chosen to participate in the Lokan International Biennale, China. Today, Team Architrave stands as a beacon of excellence, seamlessly blending local relevance with global innovation. Please join me in welcoming architect Madhura Prematillake to share his insights and remarkable journey.
Good evening. It's always a pleasure to be back in Kochi. Thank you for inviting me once again, and it was interesting to see the video of the progress of living Monsoon, many familiar faces, and to see how far you have evolved. So I'm really very happy to be back here again. Thank you for inviting me. I will start with the story, and this shape, of course, is very familiar to all of us. We saw it in Prakon's work, the ubiquitous shape of the envelope roof, which we are very familiar with in Sri Lanka, in all of Asia. This building is by Jeffrey Bauer. He built it somewhere in the 1960s, early 60s. And it was a classic of contemporary modern tropical architecture, with its pavilion roofs and the courtyards. And it draws closely from buildings in tradition. This building, which is called Iknaligoda Balau, which is an old house of the nobility, with, you can see, almost identical section and plan of pavilion, umbrella roof and courtyard. This is the Walau, this is probably from the 17th or 18th centuries. This is the Ina de Silva house by Jeffrey Bauer in the 1960s. Again, the ancestor and the descendant. You can see very clearly where the inspiration flows from. The two sections, you can see the comparison of the umbrella roofs and the courtyards, the big ones and the small ones. So the entire ethos of architecture, of climate, of response to climate, of lifestyle, everything was drawn from these two elements of the umbrella roof and the courtyard. When I started to practice in the 1990s, my sites were about that much. I didn't have space for this umbrella roof, because the umbrella roof must not only must not only have space for itself, it must have visual space to flow beyond. I had another problem, which the veranda is a beautiful inside-outside space. It protects, it cools the house. But it is also, we forget, dark and damp. Most of our traditional buildings are dark and damp. And 70% of the medical problems that rural people have in Sri Lanka comes from living in damp houses. In tradition, they say that you must light a hearth inside the house for 2 weeks before you go into occupation to chase the devils away. The devil you're chasing away is the humidity. So I found that when you introduce a veranda to a small building, which is what I was designing, the interior space became very constricted. Also the open courtyard, as Baba was able to use without any doors and windows, which means allowing not only a little bit of rain, but also all the rodents and animals to come in from one side and go out the other, which means you need staff and maintenance ability to keep it looking as good as it does in this picture. Now my clients didn't have any of that, so I had to look elsewhere for inspiration. So my work was beyond the umbrella and beyond the courtyard. Early work, I struggled with the idea of building compact spaces, small spaces which had to deal with the climate and the brief and small sites. First time that I really found a direction to move was in this building called the Longhouse, which was built in 2002. It was a long, narrow site. I had begun to practice certain ideas in the smaller sites, but in this, which was a longer site, a bigger site, I was able to express these ideas more clearly. The idea of a linear building, which does not need to rely on the umbrella and does not use the courtyard, but the linearity of the garden. So we have in this several linear elements. There's a linear wall which runs through the whole building, which separates the service and the served elements. The yellow is a circulation, the orange are all the rooms, and the brown is a veranda. Then it ends in the long garden, which is the green, which you also see in the section. So the roof is present, but it's hovering above. It does not come down. And raising the roof off and facing it in the right direction allows the light to come in. My response to the veranda was to create a space which also had light. It protected, but it also allowed the light in. So we have here pergolas, wooden pergolas, bamboo tats, and glass or polycarbonate over there, so that it screens the light, but it allows the light in and creates the shadow pattern throughout. In later buildings, like this building, which is by the sea, we developed this idea much further. And also, the idea of double screening, here is a set of window shutters and windows behind. The deep veranda, this is facing the sea to protect it. And the idea of the pergola and the bamboo tat, which creates those patterns which change during the entire day and all the seasons. I have, over the course of my practice, put down like a checklist of things that we looking back at things, formed a list which we call this manifesto. And there are some things which relate to the idea of sustainability, like the idea of building less, building on less, which means we reduce the program. We build only on 50% of the land max. We build urban, which means respecting the context, build in the landscape. Build sun and moon means facing east and west. This is critical. One of the first things I was taught, I think in second year, was not to face your windows east or west. And I found that to be pretty boring, because you miss the sunrise, you miss the sunset, and you miss the moon, and basically life is very, very dull. And in our climate, controlling the sun from the east and west is no big deal. There are many, many interesting ways to deal with that instead of just turning away from it. I won't go through all of this, but I will talk about this one, build in and out. I think I need to modify that, because this barrier between inside and outside needs to be one which the occupant can control. That is critical. That people who live in the house should be able to say, I want it open today, I want it closed today, or I want it half open today or half closed tomorrow. That ability to control that relationship is critical. So it's not enough to create veranda spaces, to create in-between spaces. You must create, and with technology you can do it, the ability to control. So the idea of screens and filters and vegetation and so forth, which can create that kind of control and difference. So the building in which a lot of these ideas came together was my own home, which was built in 2014. So that was 12 years after the long house. In this house, most of those ideas of the manifesto are manifested here. So first of all, it's a very small plot. This is the smallest legal plot size allowed in Sri Lanka, which is about 150 square meters. The footprint is less than half the site, and the building is thin and tall, and it allows, it's single bank, so it allows the air to pass through. The staircase is more than just a means of going from one floor to the other. It's single flight, so that it opens on each side to the east and west. So you get the sun bouncing off the steps at different times of the day. This was the house. We had some existing trees on the site which we built around. This is what it looks like now. So if we order pizza, they deliver it next door, because nobody lives in the jungle. These neem trees which were there on the site are probably 50 years old. We built around it. The main living space is on the upper level, so that the ground level is freed for mundane things like parking, and now my studio, my office itself resides there. And this way of relating to this deck is very important, because it extends the living space outside, and it's a pivoted, counterweighted screen which opens up to connect the inside and the outside. When it's open, it becomes a canopy, both for the sun and the rain. And when it comes down, it becomes a screen which certainly frustrates the mosquitoes from getting in. The rooms are fairly narrow. It's 2.7 meters, 9 feet wide. which is my idea of how to build small and consume less. This is the staircase catching the morning light in this instance. The western setting light will come in from the top there. And there's a skylight on top which will bring in the light at noon. And of course, like every house in Sri Lanka, it culminates with the water tank on top. This house uses some of the same ideas. Again, the idea of building on very little of the site. It's on a very large plot, but the buildable area is that much. But we chose to build on less than half of the buildable area, so that the house is a very thin sliver which steps down 6 levels, so that it steps down the hill and the contours. So at the entrance, you barely know that there is a house, because the rest of it goes down. And then it begins to emerge from the landscape. And this idea of building very close to the trees, to the big trees, is something that I learned from the late Lucky Senanayake, who was this wonderful landscape designer and artist. So if you build very close to the trees, you will have the advantage of the screening, and you also don't have the problem of the tree blocking your view. So the tree basically frames the view, while you have the advantage of the protection from it. And then the houses, we have all these screens, and I'm an unabashed user of glass, because I believe there is a way to use the glass in the tropics by screening it out, by adding these balconies and pergolas and various elements which will protect and help to use the indoor-outdoor space. The manifesto which I talked about is about giving our clients the best deal possible, deriving the best options for our clients. When we consider the idea of architects designing public buildings, simply satisfying our clients is not enough, to my mind. We have an obligation to people who have no say in how the building is created, but who are forced to use it, whether they live in it, whether they work in it, or whether they just walk by it on their way home. People are affected by buildings, and we as architects or as planners or as developers have an obligation to them to provide certain things which I call rights. So this idea of a bill of rights for users of architecture came about in considering the obligation of the building industry to people who have no control over the kind of spaces they occupy. So ideas like, and I'm applying this to people who live in public housing, people who work in large workplaces like offices or factories, people who go to jail, people who are children who use school buildings. So the right to public open space, the right to private open space, the right to interact with nature, the right to fresh air, the right to feel the breeze or warmth, the right to natural light, the right to experience sunrise and sunset, which means the passing of the day. Most of these you would think are taken for granted, but I've done workshops with students of architecture or young architects from in many countries in South Asia, and very often you find that even a young architect cannot find lodgings which satisfy all these things. This one is what I was talking about, the right to control the relationship between inside and outside. Very often you don't get that in your hotel room because the doors are fixed shut. The right to privacy, dignity, the right to personalize, the right to an environment that will age gracefully, the right to age with dignity, and the right to cope with disabilities. So when we had this opportunity to design a public building, these ideas were working in our minds. This is the Jaffna Cultural Center, which is in the north of Sri Lanka, in the former theatre of war, where the Sri Lankans fought each other in a bloody civil war for 35 years. It is the prime facility for culture and art in the city of Jaffna, and it was a gift from the government of India at the end of the war, and as a gesture of reconciliation at the end of the war, and a catalyst for social and political change in the city of Jaffna. The city of Jaffna is a now bustling commercial town, and with a lively art scene and a lively cultural context. The site is located in a very important place next to this building, which is the Jaffna Public Library, this building here, which is Jaffna's most revered public institution, because the people of Jaffna have very great respect for education and knowledge. So this public library is treated like a temple. So people take their shoes off when they enter it. So our site was located right next to it. So the primary response had to be defined by building next to this much smaller but much more important cultural icon. So our first gesture was this is our site here. It comes right up to here. This is the public library next to it. So our first gesture was to pull back our building up to this, to the facade, the front of the public library. And then to extend the garden of the public library right across our front. So basically, we were pulling ourselves back to fall in line with the public library. And then we introduced this facade, this colonnade, which observes the scale and the rhythm and the material of the library. It doesn't observe the same details, but it observes scale and rhythm. So that when you stand here at the entrance, it appears like the public library is extended across the front of our building. You do not see our building. This is the formal entrance to the building. You see it like an extension of the library. These are the two front edges for comparison. So the idea was to be secondary in that position to the library. The design was selected via competition, which was conducted by the High Commission of India and the Sri Lanka Institute of Architects. And what we tried to do was create a contemporary building, but which was inspired by the traditions of the region. There are 3 built elements in it: a cultural museum, auditorium, and a learning spire, all arranged around a public square and next to this waterfront. So this public square was not part of the brief. It's something which we introduced to create a public gathering space, because it's a public building and we felt that without a public open space it had no relevance. The base is on 3 levels and then there's a spire which goes up, as I will explain. The first building is the Cultural Museum, which is what you see here. And it is the formal entry to the building. This is the colonnade. You can see the presence of the building next door being extended across. So our building is behind this facade and it rises up behind it, which is a completely different material. It's steel and glass. The colonnade is white masonry. And the two are separate. There's a physical gap which separates the two. So it is very clear that we are wearing a respectful garb in the presence of the respected building next door. This forms the formal entry and it is also a public exhibition space. And it opens to the courtyard, the public square at the back. It has 3 levels with open exhibition spaces and an enclosed museum on top. And it is topped by a dome, which is an echo of the dome of the public library next door. And under this dome is the main exhibition space of the museum. So the actual character of this building is only revealed on the inside. When you see it from the public square on the inside, that's when you see this building as it is, with its timber screen and its dome. Until then, it was hiding behind the colonnade. The public square itself is a very critical part of the design. All 3 buildings, the public entries from the public square. So this is a former vehicle street which was pedestrianized to create a promenade next to this lake, and the public entries through this, and then entries from the public square into each of these. This public square, this particular location is remembered. It has a very strong place in the memory of Jaffna because there was an open air theatre, a small amphitheatre here before the war, where they would hold classical music concerts very often, and it was a part of the memory of the city. So we wanted to create a public activity space in that very same spot. We planted 100 neem trees to create the shade because it's a harsh climate during the summer months. And the blank wall of the auditorium, we introduced this art wall where the idea being that artists could display their art and people could walk up these platforms and engage with them. And the square then steps down in the to form an amphitheatre, to form a performance space, which is first on the street here, and then it steps down to the lake where there is a floating stage. The auditorium is a 600 plus seat facility. It is a limited depth because it's designed specifically for a type of performance where you need to see the facial expression of the performer, like Bharatanatyam. So it's a 23-meter depth but wider. And the acoustic walls of the auditorium carry a special motif, which is the pattern of the Palmyra leaf fence, which is the most frequently seen, most well-known urban feature of Jaffna. So when you sit there for a while, this pattern slowly begins to become evident. The building was designed to contain learning facilities for the arts. So studios, conference spaces, teaching spaces and so forth. And the idea being that if there was one building which was going to be prominent here, it should relate to the same ideas as the public library, the idea of education and knowledge. So there is the old icon, which is the public library, and the new symbol, which is also to do with learning. Therefore, the learning tower. A base level of 3 floors, and then about 7 or 8 floors above that. The floors are open on its longer sides, so that it allows the sea breeze to pass through. So the building on more than 7 floors is completely naturally ventilated, and it is wrapped around by this timber screen, which screens the sun, allows the breeze to pass through, and creates these patterns which move across each floor. So as a result of, and of course allows the views also. As a result of the screen, these solar panels which are on top of the roof can be used for 70% of the power requirement of this building, because it makes maximum use of natural light and ventilation. Screen itself was made of 3 meter by 3 meter panels, so that it could be fitted from inside. So there was no scaffolding required to erect this on 13 floors. Each one was fitted as a 3 meter panel from inside. And it can be, if it is necessary to repair it or replace it, it can be done the same way. The inspiration for this tower, for this building, we have drawn from the Hindu architecture of the region. For example, the learning tower is influenced by the idea of the Gopura. The entrance steps to the learning tower is derived from the idea of the Ther Murtipadi, the chariot house steps. And of course, the steps down to the lake is inspired by the steps of the tank. The idea was to create a public building which is drawing on the traditions of Jaffna, relating to its historical context without necessarily being pastiche or copying elements. Jaffna is at the architectural crossroads between modernity and tradition. There is a whole identity issue being explored in the architecture that is happening in Jaffna. Our take is to say that you can be contemporary and you can draw from tradition at the same time. It is not being used as much as it should have, because architects can only do so much. The bureaucrats must use the building in the way it was intended. So this was one such instance, a classical music concert in that same space, an IT festival, which basically used the entire space the way it should be. But unfortunately, to the street, this is what you see. You get these construction fences still in space, because the building is not manned or staffed in a way that would allow the public free access. So unfortunately, that's your pedestrian, so-called pedestrian street, which is now closed off by this ugly fence. But it remains a landmark even from across the lagoon, and something that is, I hope, calling for the people of Jaffna to come and use it in the future. Thank you.